career conversation. Today we are meeting with Ashley Roose from Open Door Mission. We are super excited to have her here today talk about her career path, Open Door Mission, and professionalism in the workplace. All great topics. So to start off, Ashley, go ahead and just tell us a little bit about yourself.
Sure. As you said, my name's Ashley, and I am the director of HR at Open Door Mission. I graduated from Brockport High School, so right on the other side of campus from you guys. And then I did wind up moving out of town for college. And when I pursued my master's degree, I came back to the Rochester area. I fell in love with North Chi area, bought my house out there where I now live with my four-legged baby. Her name is Roxy. And I am a huge proponent, especially being in HR, where you're dealing with people and working in human services and you're dealing with trauma day in and day out. I do really, really strongly believe in self-care. And so self-care, I love hiking. I'm a very avid reader, and everyone finds out very, very quickly that I am a Star Trek nerd. I believe TV is a form of escapism, so I certainly don't want to watch, TV that feels too much like real life. So that's a little bit about me in a nutshell.
All right, awesome. So our first question. This is not the first question. This is the second question. Can you tell us about how you came to work for Open Door Mission?
Sure. Networking. And a little bit of self-development. One of my very strong personal values is in service. And so I grew up where some of that came from. I grew up with a dad who was very involved in civic and community engagement. And both my bachelor's degree and my master's degree, the schools that I went to for each were also a big supporter of volunteerism and in servant leadership. And so that's kind of always been a part of who I am. And it was through one of these volunteer groups that I was in that I met who is now our current executive director. And when they had, she knew that I was trying to change careers and transition into she had reached out to me, not into human services, into human resources. She had reached out to me and said that they had a position that was open. And so I kind of molded the position as I grew with the position and as the agency grew. So anybody who is looking to get started, I believe half of it is what you know and half of it is who you know. So get out there. Networking isn't always in the formal sense of going to business events and things like that. Because like I shared, I met the current executive director because we both had a shared interest in something and we both volunteered with that cause, and that's how we met each other.
Definitely love that plug about networking. Completely agree with you there.
Yeah, I thought you guys might like that.
Definitely. We're always pushing people to do more networking. It's definitely hard with the pandemic, but there's ways to do it. That's for sure.
Yeah, it is hard.
Favorite part about working for Open Door Mission?
Kind of twofold. On a personal level, I think it's pretty commonly understood when you work in nonprofits, you wear multiple hats. So when, like I shared a moment ago, when I came to the Open Door Mission, I was kind of launching into the HR profession, and it was an HR assistant position. It was a hybrid with a different role, and the agency is growing. And so as the agency grew, I was kind of able to grow with that myself. It's a department of one, so I have to do everything from onboarding, recruitment, some separations, unfortunately, vendor management, things like that. So it's been a blessing because it's not everybody gets to find a position that they can organically grow with the position. A lot of times when you step into these types of roles, you kind of have to come with that experience under your belt. So working here is just kind of afforded me that opportunity. On an organizational level, I really enjoy working with the Open Door mission because I really stand by what the agency values and what we provide to the community. Historically, most people know us as the traditional soup kitchen with an emergency shelter for men, and not so familiar is that we have had an addiction recovery program for men. And over the last, I want to say especially in the last 5 years, we've definitely done a lot of expanding. Our emergency shelter now is inclusive to men and women. We've launched a transitional program for women and children. So, I just really love that have the community recognition. We've been around for as long as we have. And I love how we're growing and expanding. And it's just kind of it's a cool place. It's a cool place to work in.
That's great. It's so nice to hear when people really love what they do and are passionate about what they're doing.
Yeah.
What is the most important thing you have learned along your career path up to this point?
Self-awareness and humility. I have to understand my limits, but also remind myself sometimes of what I'm capable of. Learning how to collaborate with others towards shared goals. And I don't want to speak too much on this point because some of this does get a little bit into my presentation, but I will kind of leave it at that for now.
Perfect. We'll look forward to learning more about that later. What advice would you give to someone who's looking to get into this field?
Okay. The first advice I would say, if you're trying to get into human resources specific, is if you can, and you have the ability to do so, because it's not cheap, is get your certificate. As I've been watching the trends within HR, HR is not a profession like an attorney or a doctor where you have to get certain types, you're required to get certifications, licenses to practice your craft, but we are evolving more or less into a litigious society. We have more social justice awareness issues that crop up, and agency leaders are looking more for those certificates. In addition to your degrees, I believe that your degrees are important. They're more holistic movies, whereas a certificate is going to be a little bit more specific to the field of HR and the legal requirements and, just general best practices.
That's good to know.
Yes. The next thing I would say, and this is probably not thought of often enough, especially if you're working in HR, understand what your own values are and understand the values of the values and the culture of the company that you are applying to work in. HR is involved in almost every aspect of the agency, from strategy development to the dynamics between employees. And if you lack the alignment with the values and the culture of the agency, you're gonna run into some conflicts. And you might have to start asking yourself if, I'm not talking about the ethical and the legal conflicts. I'm just talking about, the day-to-day dynamics. And you may find that you're not the best fit, or the company's not the best fit for you. So when you're looking and evaluating a career path and where you work, I point this out all the time in my interviews. I'm interviewing for an employee just as much as an employee is interviewing for the employer. So utilize the time in an interview to get to understand the culture and the values of the agency so that you can be better prepared to make a decision, moving forward. And then the last thing on this is, I'll be brief. And I think this advice really goes for anybody, not just someone practicing HR. It's kind of a nerdy response, but read job postings. One of the things when I graduated from college with my first degree, I wasn't really prepared, I think, for what the positions were available to me. And then when I started looking at jobs that I thought seemed to align with my degree, the positions I was interested in, I couldn't support with the degree that I had. So if there's a field that you're interested in, and even once you have a position, research, search job titles, look at what the skills and qualifications are for those positions. That's how I kind of knew that, certifications were becoming more and more in vogue, so to speak, for my profession. The more jobs I looked at, the more I was seeing that pop up. And I knew that if I wanted to advance myself and help the agency advance, getting that certificate was going to be important. So use the time in college to read job descriptions and understand the field that you want to move into.
So much great advice there. Thank you, Ashley. My next question for you is, how would you describe the perfect candidate for Open Door Mission?
As much, when I read that question, the first thing that came to my head, I laughed at, because it's also the answer that I get very often in interviews that I hate hearing. But it's, I'm going to use it anyways. People who want to help others. The reason why I dislike that question so much is because we get a lot of candidates who sometimes apply for positions. And when I ask, why do you want to work here? I want to help others. But their resume or their experience doesn't have the qualifications to back that up. So, selfishly ambitious people do work in all industries, even within human services. But we're working with people who are dealing with crisis and going through trauma. And if you don't have a passion to help people through that, you're not going to last. And I think you want to be compassionate and helpful and want to help people, but you kind of also have to have a certain amount of grit and backbone too. And then as a growing agency, I would say that, the ideal candidate would also be someone who has the ability to adapt and wear multiple hats. And I think that's probably pretty universal of a lot of places. They're looking for adaptability.
Definitely. That's definitely a good trait to have nowadays.
Yeah.
Is there anything that you wish someone had told you before you started your career?
I kind of touched on that in one of the previous questions. I pursued a college degree based on what I was interested in, not necessarily based on what I knew of that field or the available jobs to me. And so if you're interested in a particular industry, like I shared already, read the job descriptions, research, do a little bit of research into the industry you're looking to work at and things like that. The other thing I would encourage, HR is a lot, the feeling that people have when considering an HR professional is a lot like the feeling you would get when you get called to the principal's office. I did not realize that as much. I think I had a sense of it, but ideally, HR is never the one making the call on hiring or firing decisions. We're there to inform the process to the managers. But the unfortunate thing is we're never really present until those separation conversations happen. So it's unfortunate to our position, because I think that's most of what people see is when we're called in to handle the really bad situations. And so what I wish individuals understood, because they don't see that side, managers can go rogue. And I'm not saying that happened here. I'm just saying in general, employee, HR, our job is to mediate on behalf of the employee and also mediate on behalf of the employer. And sometimes that's a very difficult line to walk. And unfortunately, most of the time, employees only see when you're there defending the employer. They don't see when you're in the office with the manager, telling the manager, no, you can't do that. That's not, that's not ethical, or that's not appropriate, or, maybe there's a better way to resolve this issue. And I can't ever talk about those conversations with employees, so they don't get to see it. So if you're moving into HR, I would just encourage you in that realm to try to be visible in other ways. Show your compassionate side in other ways, so that you're not only visible in the bad situations, and that might take a little bit of work. Some individuals who are more sociable than others, that might come easy for you. I'm a little bit more of an introvert, so I have to work through that a little bit more intentionally, because at the end of the day, I do love our employees and I do love our agency, and I don't want anybody to think that that's all that I do.
For sure. Definitely, no one likes getting called to the principal's office, so you don't want that to be a position.
No, absolutely not.
All right, so my next question, I feel like there's not a good way to word this one, but are there any quote unquote negative traits that you see in recent college graduates?
I did laugh when I saw that question. I was like, wow, that's a blunt way to put it. I think, and I don't think this is necessarily a specific to a generation. I think it's just any college graduate. There is a lot of, and I have to also be cautious how I say this too, because I'm a big supporter of college degrees. I think there's a lot of emphasis on the importance of college degrees. And I think sometimes it creates an unrealistic expectation for a college graduate, thinking they are more qualified for a position than they really are. I certainly understand the costs of student loans. I'm working on paying off 2 student loans. I went to school twice. So I understand the cost. But sometimes I think if you don't have any experience in the field, education opens up a door for you to be considered for a position. Certainly, if you have experience and education, that's certainly going to open you up to better positions and better pay. But if that's all that you're I don't want to downplay it, but that if that's all that you're coming into the interview with, have realistic expectations, especially I think in the field of human services, where so much of that is incumbent on your ability to provide support services. So much of that is dependent on how much community resources do you have knowledge of, right? And they don't really teach case management in college. And so, there is a balance. And I've seen good students, good employees who've sabotaged their careers because they've had a conversation with a supervisor and I'll talk a little bit about this in the presentation too, but kind of had the attitude that because they had the college degree and their supervisor who's been in the field for 30 years, they somehow had more knowledge than their supervisor. So just kind of be realistic. Your education is certainly a tool, and I would never downplay your education, because I think that would, like I said, if you don't have the experience, it opens up the doors. And if you have the experience, it helps you, I think, advance in your career much quicker. Certainly, but just kind of be mindful of, and I struggled with that too when I when I graduated. The other thing I would talk a little bit about is the use of social media. Social media it's hard for HR to talk about it because so much of it is, it's an ever-changing topic in the legal realm. Back in the day, I'm not old enough to experience back in the day, but back in the day, you had your work life and you had your personal life, right? And what you experienced with maybe you come home and you vent about it to your family, but that was kind of the end of it. You had your executive director and you had the director of PR, and those are the only people that engaged in the public realm across whatever mediums. Whereas now we have social media and that kind of blurs things. I could be at the office and, I could be updating something on Facebook. Maybe I'm on lunch, maybe I'm not on lunch, or, we develop Facebook friendships on, with our colleagues. And sometimes, now that you're posting something on Facebook in your personal life, that follows you into your professional life. So I'm not going to really say, what you should or shouldn't do, but just kind of when engaging with social media, just be really, really mindful. And I think that's probably more applicable to this generation than it was in previous generations.
For sure. That's definitely great advice. Yeah. My next one is there anything that would surprise people about your daily work?
Today I'm making chili for our moms.
I love that.
That's very abnormal. It is not in my job description, but we provide residential programming, and we also ascribe to the idea that, when needed, sometimes it's all hands on deck. And so what that kind of plays out is in our program realm, if we are short-staffed, we'll pull staff from other departments, so you have an element of cross-training. If a shift can't be covered, then it goes to the manager. If it can't be filled by the manager, it then goes to our programs director. And if our programs director can't do it, then each member of our executive team is assigned a program. And so one of my facility that I've been assigned to is our Women and Children's Transitional House. And if I can't fill in a shift, then our executive director steps in. So it's just really cool to see, from frontline all the way up to our executive director, we kind of all step in as needed to get the job done. And so, so sometimes it's kind of interesting when I'm learning something new that I never thought I would ever do in HR. But again, I think that's just unique to where I am in not all places. So
definitely. And then my last question before your presentation, what is something that a person can do to set themselves apart from other candidates? I feel like you've touched on a couple things, but is there any last thing you'd like to say on that?
Sure. Believe it or not, if a job posting says to complete an application, complete the application. I use Indeed. I've used, starting to use Handshake. Thank you, John. And a couple of other job boards. And some of those, when you're utilizing a job board, they kind of mock create a resume for you. Don't do that. They're never great. But fill out the application, because one of the things that I'm looking for is, can you follow instructions? And if the instruction says complete an application and you don't do that, you've already shot yourself in the foot because you didn't follow directions. Make sure you read the qualifications. A lot of, I kind of shared already, a lot of people like the idea of working for us because they like our mission. They like what we do. They want to be a part of it. But they're applying for positions where they don't have any qualifications. And so it becomes cumbersome when you have to go through 100 resumes and you're trying to find that candidate that stands out. And one of the things that I see a lot is, and I think this comes probably from an older generational instruction for resume building is, a lot of resumes are submitted and applications are completed chronologically. And there's nothing wrong with chronological resumes, but sometimes I'll be in an interview where someone will say something and I'm like, oh, that's really, really great. How come that wasn't on your resume? Because you would have been in my, my A list, not my B list for the interview. And she's like, well, I didn't have room on one page, so I just gave you my most recent. It's like, okay, can you send me your resume and give me your experience that's relevant to the position, because you would have been on my A list, not my B list. And so chronological works if you don't have a lot of experience. I would say for most college students, that's probably okay. But just kind of tuck that way in the back of your head as you're considering career advancements. Always make sure your most relevant experience is on a resume. And honestly, that may mean that you have 5 different resumes, and that's okay. So just make sure it's applicable.
Yes, I love that advice. We always tell students relevant up to the front, like,
Yep.
Yes. All right. So that is the end of all my questions. I will pass it over to Ashley for your presentation.
Okay. All right. I'm gonna make sure I did this right. And are you seeing the presentation?
I'm seeing my face, actually.
Oh, hold on. All right. Choose.
Sometimes you have to drag the team's screen off to the side.
Yeah. Oh, I just lost a page. I did this right last time. How's that?
Perfect.
Okay, we're there. All right. So yes, I'm glad that I got to speak on the topic of professionalism. I was a little worried at first. I'm like, how do you come up with 15 minutes of professionalism? I feel like some of that is innate, but it's, as I sat down and pulled my notes together, it's really not. So thank you so much for sharing, giving me this opportunity to share with the students a little bit about what I do and my company, and just kind of my feedback on workplace professionalism. As I kind of mentioned earlier, we have been around since the 50s. We're generally known for our soup kitchen, but we've really begun to expand and push forward, redeveloping workplace best practices, and some of the programs that we have now that I'm excited to share with you. Within the last 2 years, we've launched a Women and Children's Center. We've expanded our emergency shelter to now have 40 beds for men and 10 beds for women. Transitional housing program for women, and I said that, I'm sorry. Permanent supportive housing program where we help individuals who are experiencing chronic homelessness find stable housing and providing them with case management services. And I'm really, really excited to announce within the next couple of weeks, we're hoping to launch a press release. I had to make sure I can share this in today's presentation, but we're going to be launching and expanding our men's addiction recovery program to now include a men and women's addiction recovery program. And so one of the benefits of our current executive director is she had a vision for all of this growth. And because we have been in the community for as long as we have, and we've had this culture of being a family agency, she really wanted to raise the standards and raise our standards of excellence. And so that's when she kind of brought me on, and working with the executive leadership to establish, the staffing handbooks and, the job descriptions, and improving our processes so that we can better improve our programming to the community. And so I believe I was hired not just because of who I knew at the time, but because I lived by a particular value. And I said that I was going to do that. I was going to hit next on my one screen, and it's going to be on the wrong screen. I got to get my document back up. Sorry. All right, there I am. So I believe I was hired not just because of who I knew, but I live by a particular value. And I believe personally that all choices have consequences. Consequences are neither good nor bad, but a causal response to something else. And so how I conduct myself, whether that is at work or in my personal life, is going to have a natural consequence to that. And so let me put it this way. I am a representative of Open Door Mission. How I conduct myself may leave a positive or negative impression of Open Door Mission, whether or not I want it to. So how I choose to conduct myself outside of the workplace matters. In the legal realm, there are, of course, certain employee protections for sure, but we can't ever escape the first impression we leave on people. If people in the community know that Open Door Mission exists to provide a substance abuse recovery program, and I'm out in the community and I'm getting drunk every weekend, yes, I may have certain legal impressions, but I also represent the leadership of Open Door Mission. And so, it might cause people to second guess a little bit about the integrity of the agency. And so that's kind of why I said earlier in the questions is making sure your personal values and your personal values and what you believe align with the agency and the culture and the values of the agency you're seeking employment with. So I'm really excited. To speak on this. So what I want to share is also, growing up and participating in various programs through high school and college, I learned a lot about the tangibles of professionalism. Being reliable, dressing appropriate, and proper communication. I think those are all really well understood. If you attend college, you're ideally learning about the profession you want to work in and gaining skills-based competencies. That is part of professionalism. And then there are the soft skills that involve your attitude and how you present yourself. And so I'm going to talk a little bit about each of these. And the first one that I'm going to speak to is reliability. And reliability is probably, I think, the easiest to achieve. I think that whether or not you're a reliable individual is entirely dependent on the choice that you make, because it doesn't require a specific skill to do that. You can show up on time. Nobody needs to teach you to do that. You just, if you have to be somewhere at 9 o'clock, you should probably be there at 9 o'clock with some time to spare. Show up on time, manage your time efficiently, work hard and be consistent, and then follow through on the commitments that you make. And I would really, really strongly encourage to utilize time in college to begin to develop these habits, because if you graduate in May and you get a job in June, that month is not going to give you enough time to establish proper work habits. Have fun in college, but start developing who you are and what your professional image is now. The next point I am going to speak to, I'm going to lead off with a question. Forbes published an article in response to a study by the National Association of Colleges and Employers, and managers were asked this question: which of the following, they didn't ask this question, they established 10 competencies of what they look for or don't look for in students. And so I kind of want to, so I took that information and created this question. Which of the following do you think is not a top 10 quality of employers? And I don't know if I could read the comments.
I can read off the answers.
Okay.
Answer in the comments.
Okay, so they are: first, able to analyze quantitative data, demonstrate professional attire, able to communicate verbally, and able to plan, organize, and prioritize work. And I think my presentation gave away the answer. that was supposed to float in at the next click, but it is.
I didn't notice it at first. I would have guessed.
Well, I'm curious, if people didn't see that, what would they have guessed?
We had one student guess number 4.
Okay.
Any other guesses ignoring this slide? Looks like we've just got number 4 so far. So it looks like everyone else saw the answer right away.
Yeah. Sorry about that. I thought I fixed that this morning. But yes, it is. It was revealed that employers did not list, a particular dress code as a top priority. But that being said, just because attire isn't listed doesn't mean that your physical presentation can't make or break an interview. And so the reason I want to touch on this particular topic now is because dressing appropriately has changed as many workplace cultures adopt a more relaxed environment, become more remote, are multi-generational and multicultural. That being said, it's pretty universally understood that clean and neat is the baseline. And I was trying really, really hard to find an infogram from when I was in high school and was participating in BizKids program, because it was really ridiculous thinking now what was then considered appropriate dress code, right? I think one of the things that I remember reading was it was inappropriate not to wear nylons if you're wearing a skirt or or a dress. And so it's like, I don't know too many girls in my generation that wear nylons anymore. So it just, it kind of made me laugh. I couldn't find it, but it was just to demonstrate that our concept of appropriate dress code really does change between the generations, and also what type of environment that you're working in. And I do remember being told that it's okay to overdress for an interview. I think this is a little bit of a myth. I think overdressing or underdressing can both represent a lack of social awareness, and both may be inappropriate. So I'll give you 2 examples. We had a position open in our emergency shelter, and we had a few people interview for the position, but I want to share the example that I had with 2 of them. One showed up in gym shorts and slides, and the other showed up in a suit and fine jewelry. Given the position, given the location, both were examples of inappropriate dress code. Because it's such a fluctuating realm, I would just encourage that when you go for the interview or once you've gotten the job, it's perfectly okay to ask your manager or HR what the appropriate dress code is, because you wouldn't want to, like I said, overdress or underdress for the position. Another pillar of professionalism is organization. There we go. And I'm sharing with you 2 images that kind of speak to the point that I want to talk to a little bit. Image 1 is a cartoon. I loved this cartoon. It reminded me a little bit of myself. I'm in HR and IT, and we live in piles of paperwork and computer equipment, honestly. I'm always mindful of making sure confidential stuff isn't on my desk. But then if you haven't met this person, I promise someday soon you will meet a person whose office looks a little bit like the second diagram there. So if you get to know Sarah, learn her magic tricks, because I do think if someone's office looks like that, they've done a little hocus pocus on their room, and I want to hire them to fix my office. But I share these images because both images may be right, both may be wrong. I would never advise that an office to look disorganized, and there is absolutely nothing wrong with creative decoration. I had to sit in, however, on separation meetings with employees whose offices looked like the second image, because they were missing deadlines or just didn't have, they couldn't prioritize their work. But on the flip side, I've also known and have worked for individuals with important titles and big responsibilities who were perfectly capable of delivering a fantastic business plan. And so that's more the type of organization that I really want to call your attention to. And another one of the questions that I ask in almost all of my interviews is, how do you plan and organize your day, your project, or assignments? I don't care if you use, and how do you respond to competing priorities? I don't care if you use a physical day planner. I don't care if you use your cell phone. I don't care if you have sticky notes, all over your computer screen. I want to see how you process through information and how do you organize the tasks that you're assigned to do, and how do you navigate through conflicting priorities and things like that. So organization, I think a lot of people think immediately to the physical realm of organization. But I think the layout of your desk just kind of aids this process. It doesn't make or break or define your ability to be organized. The next slide I am coming to is communication. Just like dress code, I think that communication styles vary. One of my favorite business books is called Sticking Points. It responds to 4 generations in the workplace across 12 different sticking points. The 4 generations are the traditionalists, the baby boomers, the Gen Xers, and the millennials. And one of the sticking points that it speaks to is communication, and that's the illustration that you see on the presentation. When I read through this book and I saw this diagram, I really had to laugh at the millennial segment. I am kind of a shadow generation between the Gen Xers and the millennials. I kind of fall into a little bit of both of these. But when I read, the last line where it says, "Did you really just leave me a voicemail?" That's me. I am notoriously bad at following up on my voicemails. I'm so glad that my voicemails now go to my email. I'm much better at responding, so that's where a little bit of the Gen Xer in me comes into play. But I had one of my managers, very nice guy. He's a little bit older than I am, and with modern day technology, we have caller ID on all of our work phones. So I saw that I had a missed call from this employee. And then, I saw that I had a couple of voicemails. So I was going through my voicemails. And so I have a caller ID alert that this gentleman called me and I had a missed call. Then I had a voicemail. And then I opened up my email and I had an email from this gentleman telling me that he left a voicemail. So that kind of goes into my next point. Communication is very broad. It's verbal, it's nonverbal, it's written, and it's visual. It requires speaking, listening, writing, and responding. It can be via email, memos, and phone calls, in-person meetings, and in today's era, even video. We're doing that right now. And a successful communicator knows their audience. In HR, one of my responsibilities is communicating important information across the entire organization. If I know that 50% of my population isn't particularly computer literate and I'm only relying on my ability and hoping that my employees are reading my emails, then I've done a pretty poor job at proper communication, because I've not recognized I'm operating within my preference, not somebody else's preference. And so I think to be a successful communicator isn't just, am I speaking clearly, am I articulating my words, but it's also recognizing who your audience is and knowing how to adapt your communication style across the generations or preferences. When it comes to verbal communication, speak what is relevant and appropriate and practice active listening. Demonstrate you are engaged with the person who is speaking to you and understand what they are communicating to you. Sometimes what we hear is we interpret that information is not always what the communicator is trying to interpret. So make sure you really understand what's being said. General rule of thumb, I don't ever think it's appropriate to swear in the workplace, so don't do it. Use commonly understood words to avoid miscommunication or misunderstanding. And so as much as possible, try to avoid slang and try to avoid buzzwords because they mean different things for different people. Written communication can take on several forms: email, text, memos, and faxes, although faxes are kind of, dropping off, but they're still relevant. But each of these have varying levels of formality. Know what the formality is and use them. Always proof your work. Make sure you're using proper greetings and avoid grammatical mistakes. I received an email one time from one of our vendors, and this kind of goes back to, technology, I think, is advancing faster than our ability to adapt. But I could tell that this vendor had emailed me using voice text, and it was kind of a comical email deciphering what he was trying to say to me. So try to avoid voice text because it doesn't always get it right. And so then, where's my mouse? I don't know if any of you guys have ever seen the movie. I hope this plays. Oh, it's not. Okay, that's why I put the words on there. Oh, here it is. Hopefully you can hear it. Oh. So kind of more or less a little humor inserted into there, but sometimes we use words that don't really exist, and sometimes we're using them in inappropriate ways. So if you want to sound intelligent, make sure you know the proper use of the word that you're using. My fifth talking point involves technology. And this part is purely based on my own observation. I was talking with one of our recent hires who was actually a recent graduate. She graduated in the spring from SUNY Brockport. And so I asked her, I said, I'm giving a presentation on professionalism. My audience is about your age and your, phase of life. What's something that you wish somebody had talked to you on with regards to professionalism? And she said technology. And this is where knowing how to communicate comes into play. And I said, can you tell me what you mean by technology? Because I instantly thought of how do you communicate via email, and how should you present yourself online? And that's not what she meant at all. She meant social media. So if you're not clear, always ask. So I'm kind of tying back into my previous point. But like I said, I'm in the shadow generation between the millennials and the Gen Xers. And I remember seeing a laptop for the first time. I remember, leaving the house without a cell phone. And then when I did get a cell phone, I was on a cell phone plan that only allowed 100 texts per month. I'm much higher than that now. And technology use is rapidly evolving. And so the diagram that I have on here kind of, it would have been interesting to see if this research was a little bit more current, because I think COVID is our response to COVID and remote work being more, of an option for a lot of employers. It'd be interesting to see how these numbers have changed. But it's just kind of interesting to see how technology advancing, how fast technology is advancing, and how fast we are adapting to it. But at the end of the day, computers, cell phones, and social media, they're really just tools. And how we engage with technology depends on our age and industry. Yes, if you're in a technological field, I think you're going to use it a lot more than in the human services field. But this rapid change is challenging as we reconsider what is appropriate versus inappropriate as it relates to our online presence. And that's kind of, one of the points we talked about in the beginning, talked about the negative traits of recent college graduates. So how we engage with all of this may impact how we define appropriate dress. You know, if I'm in a Zoom meeting, am I required to be in a suit and tie like I am in the office? We don't know. I think these things, HR professionals and employers are beginning to ask themselves these types of questions. You know, communication style is absolutely going to change as, you know, I said earlier, you know, how we communicate on email, how we communicate face-to-face, how we communicate via text, all of those styles vary. So I don't have necessarily a recommendation per se on how to interact in this realm. It's more of a recommendation to be mindful that this is a realm that we're going to see changing. Employers aren't quite sure how to respond to this, and we're kind of figuring it out as we go because we have to. So be willing to adapt and extend a little bit of grace to your employers because we're trying to adapt just as much as you are. My next slide, I am going to speak to competency. Competency and conduct are the next two takeaways that I want to discuss and spend a little bit more time in. Once you develop the habit of reliability and organization, establish the appropriate dress code for your place of employment, know how to properly communicate and leverage technology as a useful tool, then comes competency and conduct. Because competency isn't visible, it's sometimes overlooked in the dialogue of professionalism. But being a professional in your field means you know how to perform your position. And if you don't know how to perform a particular function or you have questions, competency means you have the basic foundation to know how to find the answers. Competencies vary with each industry, position, and where you are within the hierarchy of the organization. Competency is not static, and it requires learning and adaptation. You can gain competency through formal and informal education, on-the-job training, lived and worked experience. Everyone present in this seminar is practicing a form of professionalism because you're choosing to develop yourself and being proactive so that you're better prepared for the workplace when you graduate, unless you're here for the extra credit, because those are my favorite seminars too. I'm not sure if you get extra credit for being here. And lastly, when it comes to competency, strive for excellence in your work. Always be developing yourself within your field. Never stop learning. And the last point that I'm going to speak to is conduct. And I want to start off by sharing two quotes that have current relevance. I presume everyone knows by now that we lost Justice Ruth Ginsburg. I have a quote by her and by President Trump, and I really promise that this is not political. And regardless of either's politics and how you may feel towards them, I really want to emphasize what each of them have said because it really speaks and relates to today's topic of professionalism. President Trump, in his statement on the passing of Justice Ginsburg, said this of her and how she exemplified professionalism. One can disagree without being disagreeable towards one's colleagues or a different point of view. Justice Ginsburg herself stated, "Don't be distracted by emotions like anger, envy, and resentment. They just sap energy and waste time." When I was asked to speak on professionalism, there are two moments that I instantly recalled. The first moment was the day I got hired into human resources. I was having a conversation with my dad, and he said to me, whenever he was in a meeting and someone from human resources was present, that person was always the most professional person in the room. And so he said to me, always be the most professional person in the room. And the second memory was a time that I was probably the most unprofessional, and it happened long enough ago that I feel comfortable sharing it with you today. It was my first job. I was assigned to a team that had two supervisors, 2 employees to each supervisor. And one of my coworkers not only had a different supervisor than me, but we were oil and water personalities in the worst of ways. And I'll never forget one particular day, we had both worked 12 hours. At that point, we were probably working 6 to 7 days a week. We were on a deadline. So on top of already not liking each other and feeling exhaustion, there is now the stress of a deadline. And so we were both on the same project, but we had different assignments, and I was on an assignment that the other coworker wanted. So at this point in the story, you can probably see where I'm going. I was granted an exemption to a particular workplace protocol in order to complete the assignment on time. My teammate tried to correct me in this, and I chose to respond, and my colleague disagreed. And instead of practicing self-confidence in what I knew was right and what my boss told me I can do, I reacted to the situation on the defense. We entered into an argument. It escalated into a shouting match to our team, and not only to our team, but the rest of all the other teams on that same floor. So it was full view of everyone are shouting and screaming. So I don't really like that story, but it was long enough. It kind of drives my point home a little bit. And so this is what I learned from that experience. My boss called me into his office, and my boss was 6 foot something, tall dude. He was very intimidating. But he was also my first workplace mentor. If you don't have a mentor, I highly encourage that you find one. He always told me that I used to think and work like he did. In hindsight, I see how he was working to guide me out of some bad workplace habits I had as a young 20-year-old. And in this conversation, he said he was my boss, not my coworker, and he wasn't my coworker supervisor either, so he couldn't control what she did or didn't do per se. And there are 3 lessons that I want to share with you that were impressed upon me then. Whatever the position, be confident in the responsibilities you are entrusted with. Defense is a very useful strategy in football, wars, and in some business situations. But in personal interactions, I believe that defensiveness is a response to self-doubt. Defensiveness is not a barometer of truthfulness to a situation, but rather a reactive response to a negative emotion. In that moment, I forgot the single truth. My boss granted me permission, not my coworker. And that leads me to my second point on this. Strive to be agreeable and know to whom you need approval. Don't chase attention and approval of those whose opinions are irrelevant to the situation. Input will always matter, and there will be disagreements, but work towards solutions, not changing other people's opinions of you or the situation. And so then this leads me to the third. If there's conflict and you can't find a resolution, or the other party is uncooperative, engage a superior. A person can be right in a situation and wrong in a response, much like I was. I'm forever grateful I was not fired that day and for the lesson this man shared with me. But as my boss, it was his job to engage my coworker supervisor, because he couldn't fix her, but he can engage with her supervisor and mediate for me. So it was his job to engage the coworker supervisor to correct this problem, and not mine. And that would have prevented, a shouting match in front of all of our colleagues. So there are other examples of proper conduct that I want to add. They're not necessarily specific to that incident, but just, some final thoughts as I've, been working the last, few years that I've had. I thought of these as I was asked, again, to consider some of the negative traits of college students. Always be humble. Be willing to accept that you don't have all of the answers. Like I said before, proper competency doesn't mean that you're going to have all the answers or know how to do everything. It means you have the proper foundation to build from and you pursue excellence. Don't lie about your mistakes, own them, learn from them, and do the best not to repeat it. And recognize work experience as valuable as an education. I have seen smart employees sabotage their careers. I shared that earlier, so don't do like them. Don't gossip. Don't gossip about others, and don't gossip about yourself. And what I mean by that is don't air your dirty laundry. There are positive and negative traits to office politics. You need to build workplace alliances, but no one needs office cliques. If you have a problem with a coworker, address the concern with the coworker and seek resolution. And then, you know, unless the problem is, you know, a form of harassment, and then I don't encourage you to talk to that person. At that point, follow whatever your workplace practices are for reporting harassment. But if you can't find an amicable resolution, engage a neutral third party. An appropriate third party would be a supervisor or HR professional. Don't grab your best friend to mediate a conversation, because I promise that's not going to go well either. Don't talk about the problem with someone else who is not in a position to resolve the issue. If you need to vent, because everybody does, find someone not affiliated with the company. And if you're complaining for no reason, then just stop, because it ruins office morale, it creates division on teams, and is counterproductive to the purpose of the agency. And you'll start to develop a negative outlook. We can develop workplace friendships. Be wise with whom you share your personal life, and always remember the rule of TMI. And if you are discussing personal life within your colleagues, please never do that in the presence of clients or customers. It's just never a good idea and always ends badly. So in closing, utilize your time in college to develop your professional image. Certain behavior may be tolerated or even permitted in college. I think we, as college students, we get certain graces, but that won't be tolerated at work. And by establishing this habit now, you will be better equipped when you do enter to the workplace. So with that, I will open it up for questions.
All right. Thank you so much, Ashley. I'm going to stop the recording and then continue with the questions.
Okay.